Before I really knew God, my life was seemingly pretty great. I identified or really just used grades and following rules to define who I was. I didn't have this overall picture of a being over my life, even though I was in church and I was getting straight A's and I was in sports and I was a Fellowship of Christian Athletes leader. My last semester of college in 2011, I was 23. I had easy fluff classes. My sorority activities were winding down. I had a job in public accounting lined up for right when I graduated. And I had a boyfriend of 3 years and things were pretty great. And I still felt insanely lost. I was realizing that I didn't have grades and teachers to kind of define who I was and measure my success or failures. And I also wasn't going to church or spending any time with God. I was going out with my friends because I was in all these fluff classes. And so I remember going out for one of my friends' birthdays and got way too drunk that evening. I met a guy, I was in a relationship, met a different guy, and ended up being date raped in my apartment that evening. I didn't call it that until earlier this year through a lot of counseling and a friend who was brutally honest with me. And once I really realized what it was, I realized I did say no, and I said no multiple times, and then I blacked out. And so that evening I labeled myself a cheater, and I woke up the next morning and broke up with my boyfriend of 3 years with no explanation. I distanced myself from all of my friends, and I was also determined to make it work with this new guy that took my virginity. I was determined to make him love me. It didn't matter if he wanted to or if that was right or wrong, because it was going to happen. That relationship was clearly toxic from the beginning, and it lasted 2 years. When it ended, I still didn't have grades to define me. I still didn't have God in my life. When the relationship ended, I reached out to a longtime friend of mine who always seemed to make me feel better about myself. So when I did this, I had no concept of who he really was. I had blinders on to who he could be. The reality is he's a narcissist and he's a heroin addict. He's been in and out of prison since he was 17 years old, and he's in his 30s. And so he clearly was the person that was going to help me get out of this funk. Not God, not my family, not my friends. This man that really I didn't truly know. A year after I got back in touch with him, we started dating. And a few weeks after that, I was pregnant. A couple months after that, he relapsed. I had him arrested for stealing my identity 9 days before my son was born. I was mortified, and I felt like everyone who had known me up until that point in my life was disappointed. No one ever told me they were disappointed, but in my head, everyone that knew me was disappointed. The next 2 years were pretty much a blur. I was raising Gage on my own with my parents and my brother and my friends and everyone's support. In February of 2018, I started seeing a counselor, and it was the best decision I've ever made. One of the first things that we talked about in counseling was how I'm constantly in the future. I was in school and getting good grades so that I could go to college. I went to college so I could get a good job. I got a good job so I could get a house. I got a house so I could start a family. I was never just living in the moment. And one of the things that rings true in Fearless Women, speaker after speaker after speaker, is that God's grace is in today, not in the what ifs of tomorrow. October 16th, 2018, I was going to court to get custody of my son. And I really didn't know how my life got to this point, but I had to explain to the judge why I ever had a child with Gage's dad in the first place. I mustered up the courage with God's help and my family's encouragement. That evening, I decided to go to my first Fearless Women event. Christy spoke about lies that we tell ourselves. Everything she said rang true to me. The number one lie she talked about was that at some point in our lives, we believe that we are the ones in charge of our destiny. We're not. God is. The number two lie is that history repeats itself. So for me, it was I was a cheater and I was always going to be a cheater. And she stated that who you once were before you knew Jesus isn't who you are after you surrender to him. And the number three lie was that you are not enough. She stated that the enemy needs us to believe this so that he can keep fueling that fire inside of us. And I can't tell you how many times a day I told myself I wasn't enough. Regardless of what everyone in my life was telling me and how happy Gage was and how successful I was at my job, it didn't matter because I was not enough. I was convinced that I was not enough. So all of these things that she said, all three of these lies were clearly spot on. But the thing that she said that really clicked for me was that if we don't heal, then we bleed on those who didn't cut us. And it was like this giant light bulb lit up the room. And I was like, I have to get my act together. Like, I cannot keep being this person that is so self-destructive. So in that moment and at that meeting, I really kind of surrendered my life, and I committed to going to church regularly, to attend Fearless Women events regularly, to continue to going to counseling. And now I know that my identity can be found through my relationship with God. But getting your foot in the door at Fearless, it's a place where you're not judged. There's always a place to sit with someone else there who came by themselves. There's always Christian counseling resources available. There's always someone to pray with you before, after, during, whatever you need. It's just really a place where you can ask questions, where you can say out loud, like I did at the beginning, I just don't understand how someone was born from a virgin. And have somebody just help you pray to accept it and pray that to know that you're human and God made you that way, and it's okay for you to question things. You just still lean into God while you're questioning them.